My name is Betty Burrell. I was the Director of Procurement Services for the City of Richmond.
Right.
My role in the monument removal was to ratify the purchase authorized by Mayor Stoney to remove the first series of monuments. It's important to forever memorialize what happened and why it happened, and to understand the climate at the time and how humans were going at each other and again dehumanizing each other, where police officers who were trying to protect the city because they wore a badge were targeted, and they could have been, and probably the 99.9% of them were not of the mindset of the police officers who murdered George Floyd. But they were swept up in the moment, just like the protesters were. And the protesters' anger and how they came out, it was just something that had reached its boiling point. And not that I support how they destroyed properties of innocent business owners, but they had reached their boiling point. And again, those that wish to divide us further would point to whomever they believe were the wrong guys, whichever side you're on. But there's a lot of culpability on what went down. And the protesters were not wrong for being angry. Maybe they were wrong for destroying private property. Police officers maybe were wrong with the tear gas, and that was another procurement that I learned about after the fact, that the then police chief, because we were in a state of emergency, and during a state of emergency, procurement regulations are not strictly adhered to. Virginia law allows you, because you can imagine if something happens, you can't wait for the procurement director to show up and sign a contract. And so there are a lot more liberties during a state of emergency, and the police chief did use his ability to procure tear gas. And I learned about it after the fact. In hindsight, maybe that could have been handled differently. Answering it as a citizen and resident of the county and not as Director of Procurement Services, obviously to the Black community, the African American community, it was a symbol of the lost cause, war, and a symbol of resistance to integration, a symbol of a desire to continue to suppress the Black community. The monuments were removed first and foremost because of the mayor's concern for the safety of individuals who were climbing on the monuments, because as we all know, they started rioting in the City of Richmond right after the videos, nationally shown videos of George Floyd being murdered by the police officers. And so the rioters were burning business buildings, they were out in the streets protesting, and the fact that those monuments represented the very oppression that could have been a impetus for things like the murder of George Floyd, because it was emblematic of how the Black community apparently felt they were all being treated. We were all being treated. And so safety first. Second was to remove the icons to finally remove the things that said the South was involved in suppressing blacks, to get rid of the reminder of the horrible things that were done to blacks by those very people standing and sitting on those monuments, the replica of them. The major difficulty, and I want to first start by saying the allegations that Mayor Stoney had anything to do with the procurement of the vendor, the contractor who removed the statues, was absolutely false. And I want that to be real clear. The state police investigated, they found the same thing, but I can tell you, as the procurement director at the time, he absolutely had nothing to do with the selection of Team Henry. He did not recommend Team Henry. He was not involved in the research to find a company willing to do the removal work. Companies were contacted by the Department of Public Works, and I know at least one, and I think more than one company said they were not going to put their employees at risk. Only Team Henry was willing to do the work, and their company's name came up as a result of work and research already done by the Commonwealth of Virginia. So the record should be abundantly clear that the political gains that were sought by making those false allegations were unfounded. Absolutely unfounded. He had nothing to do. He nor his staff had anything to do with Team Henry being selected or contracted with to do the work. The other piece of it that made it difficult was because at the time, Code of Virginia prohibited localities from removing monuments and statues. And that effective July 1 of that year, they put in place, the General Assembly put in place a process. Well, we all know it was over Memorial Day weekend that things started going really bonkers in Richmond. And the mayor felt a sense of urgency to not wait until July 1st. He even, if you look at the city council meetings, he even tried to get council on June 30th to agree, we need to take them down. And so he issued the order to have it taken down. My role after that was to simply process from the agreement that the mayor made, to simply process that purchase for payment to Team Henry as a ministerial and basically administrative function to get Team Henry paid. I don't remember at what point in June the conversation started in earnest about taking down the monuments. And the mayor was receiving advice that I read the attorney's advice to him that he had the right to do it. The city attorney's office believed that the mayor should have waited until the whole process outlined by the General Assembly had been followed. And so those conversations went back and forth. Meanwhile, the Public Works Department, as I mentioned, started doing research. Okay, if we go down this road, who could we procure to get this work done? Public Works initiated it because in the procurement process, only if the procurement department had no other choice but to do the work for the departments. Departments basically said what the scope of work would be for anything that they wanted to procure, you know, how many pieces and parts, all of the scope of work. is generally developed by the subject matter experts in the department. Procurement service personnel are subject matter experts in procurement, not in what's the best way to take down a monument. So the subject matter experts in public works did that research. They did the research. Surprised how quickly things evolved. I understood, but I was surprised. I was surprised that two sets of lawyers could see and read the same law differently. I was surprised that tax dollars were spent investigating Mayor Stoney when it was abundantly clear he had nothing to do with selecting Team Henry. So let me start by saying, when I was in school, history was a subject like, okay, I have to pass, I have to get a good grade. I am a math geek, so not until I became an adult did I understand the significance of history. The statement of people who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. Very true. My daughter is a history teacher. It's kind of odd, right? As far as memorializing the history of slavery, although in the current climate there is a move afoot in 2024 to eradicate anything about slavery from books that young people can read and understand so that they don't repeat history. I do think it's extremely important. I understand now it's extremely important to tell the whole story and the truth about what happened, and to make sure that we never dehumanize each other ever again the way enslaved people were dehumanized during the 400 years that we were in bondage. My great-grandfather was an enslaved person until he was 12 years old. So my grandfather's father, that's how far back, not that far that I have to go. My great-aunt who's living now remembers my great-grandfather. When she was a little girl, he was an old man, but she remembers him. So I have even a connection to my enslaved ancestor. His biological father sold him on the steps of New Kent County, Virginia. And he made his way back after the end of the Civil War. He made his way back to Virginia. So that history is incredibly important to my family, because fast forward, my brother served on the New Kent County Board of Supervisors for 24 years. So that history, if he didn't know his history and know how significant it is that he not only served on the board, but served several times as chairman of the board, then the significance would be lost. And I think, unfortunately for young people now, because nobody is telling them how important the history is, I know some young people who are saying now, oh, I don't need to vote. And it's like, are you kidding me? Because they don't know the history. It's critically important. In whatever form. If it's not a monument, it should be books. If it's not books, it should be in the school curriculum, whether it's in a book or not. We need to understand, because until we see each other as human beings with histories on all sides of the enslaved and the enslaver, we will continue to fight among ourselves instead of reconciling and healing and accepting that none of us living today had anything to do with what happened, but some of us are the beneficiaries of what happened. I think the this is a great project. I'm glad the city is doing this. I'm glad the library is making this part of this memory lab because it's important.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.